Thinking about becoming a pilot in 2019, let's talk about the pros and cons of a job on the flight deck. Welcome to Career Ending Opportunities, where each week we look for ways to change career and look for personal and financial fulfillment in everything we do. If you're new here, consider subscribing. Today this isn't going to be a career-changing video, it's going to be about whether you should become a pilot next year, but you never know, you may need to change in the future. So since releasing my video on why I quit British Airways, a question I've had almost every day is, should I become a pilot in 2018 or 2019? Should I give it a try? We're going to talk about that today and really try and dispel some of the myths and talk about the pros and cons of a job on the flight deck. If you're looking for the TLDR version, yes, you probably should try and become a pilot if it's a passion that you have, but go into it with some caveats and some considerations. Today I'm going to talk about British aviation, as I have very little experience in European aviation. Even when I worked in Italy, I was flying there, I was operating under a Gulf registered aircraft and thus controlled by British laws. And I have no experience at all with the FAA, but I think the principles really do translate around the world with what are still the good and bad sides of the job. So hiring trends in the UK seem to have drifted more towards taking brand new ab initio cadets out of training schools rather than employing people that have gone down the self-improver route. I went to CTC, which is now L3. You also have FTE, which is down in Jerez, and you have Oxford Aviation. There are three schools that take you from 0 hours all the way to right-hand seat of a jet. So why do the airlines like these schools so much? Well, they allow the airlines to design a training program specific to their needs, which means that when a pilot rocks up on day one, he's not just a brand new pilot, he's a brand new pilot that's been trained to follow the SOPs of the airline and to understand the company culture and ethos. That makes a huge saving over employing someone from another airline and having to convert the way that they operate the aircraft. When I left EasyJet and went to British Airways, they were two completely different operations despite the fact they were flying the exact same aircraft. So the training schools do create and produce better products for the airlines, and unfortunately at these training schools you are seen as the product, because although you are paying an awful lot of money, you are being sold on to an airline, and unfortunately that's just the reality of the way these operations work. Now, because the bespoke product has become so attractive to airlines, it's made this self-improver route that much harder. Now, self-improvers, if you're not aware, are those people that work day and night in normal jobs and then do training and flying on the side. Now, self-improvers have become less attractive to the airlines, at least that's the current state of play in the UK. But it's not because they are worse pilots or the cadet pilots are better. Unfortunately, it comes down to penny pinching. Every airline is run by its bean counters now, from removing manuals on board the aircraft and replacing them with digital ones, which is no bad thing, to flying around with less oil in the engines because of the weight saving and reducing costs. There are so many things in aviation that just come down to nitpicking and nickel and diming. And that is true of pilot recruitment. But a brand new direct entry pilot, i.e. someone that's gone down the self-improver route, or someone that's worked at another airline, will cost British Airways around £62,000 in 2018 as a basic salary. But a cadet pilot, someone starting straight out of one of those schools, is paid around £37,000 for that first year. Now, over 7 years they do join the main pay scale, but for 7 years they're paid under market value. And that's what makes them so attractive to airlines, and it's an unfortunate way the nickel and diming persists in every department in aviation. And although it sounds like I'm knocking these training schools, I'm really not. I am a product of one of them. I went to CTC back in 2004, where it cost me £60,000 in 2004 money, which equates to around £83,000 in 2018. At that time, they guaranteed you a job. If they didn't get you a job within 6 months, they gave you half your money back, and it was effectively guaranteed. On day one of the course, they asked if I wanted to be an EasyJet pilot. I said yes, and that was that. I was off to EasyJet 18 months later. Now, it'll cost you £115,000, maybe around 120 at the time this video goes live. And for that, they try and get you a job. They try to find you work at the end, but ultimately if the market dries up, you're out of luck. You know, with Brexit on the horizon, if you're about to finish your CTC or your L3 or Oxford FTE programs, it might be a little concerning that if there is a big fallout from Brexit, that you don't have a job, and unfortunately now the schools take no responsibility for that, and the weight of the financial burden and the debt just falls to you. Okay, time for some positivity. Flying is fun. It doesn't matter if you're flying a 320, a 737, or a single engine Diamond Katana. It is fun to be manually flying, and for me at least, it is a great way to spend a day, to actually have the aircraft and handle it. It can't be knocked. And you spend a lot of time solving technical problems, dealing with operational concerns, diverting because someone at Eurocontrol spilled the drink and took down a large area of European airspace. So the first few years in aviation, you're just gonna continue to learn, and you're gonna see things that you never thought could occur, and you're going to find problems that you didn't even think could exist. An example of which, many years ago on the 737 when I was a first officer, we flew from England down to, or north of England, down to Barcelona in Spain. And on the day the weather was forecast to be about 35 knots of wind straight down the runway. So not really a concern, but for operational reasons we took 1.2 tons of fuel extra, which is about 35 minutes. By the time we get to Barcelona, we're handed over to the tower, and the approach controller says, contact the tower 118.325. For your information, the last 2 aircraft have gone around, the wind is now 55 knots, and there is blowing sand. We look across the flight deck at each other like, oh, okay, this could be interesting. It's beyond the limits if it's a crosswind. We'll have to talk to the tower and find out what the wind is actually doing. Cue a full-on wind shear go around as the aircraft goes doo-doo, wind shear, wind shear. Fly the procedure, captain flying for his landing, and we go around and we get to a point where we think, right, we have X amount of fuel. Okay, we're gonna have to divert because we're not gonna try and land here. And we start looking at all the alternates. All of the mainland Spanish destinations that we could get to with sufficient fuel were unusable. The weather was completely different to what was forecast, and it was a little concerning when you're sat there. We end up diverting to Palma de Mallorca, and very long story short, we get expedited approach, and we end up landing with 1,070 kilos. So 1,070 kilos is about 30 minutes. Kept us nice and legal, meant we didn't have to fill out lots of paperwork. But we then sat there on the ground, plane full of passengers, and we're doing the fuel log at the end. We're like, oh wow, we added 1.2 tons of fuel and we've landed with less than 1.1 ton. Didn't think that would happen. You end up having these moments where you're new, where you think, wow, I didn't realize how aviation truly worked. Despite the fact that you've been training in light aircraft, when you get on the line, it's very different. So we've discussed a negative, we've discussed a positive, we've discussed the fun that you can have. This is just something to think about. And I'm going to assume that you pass all the psychometric testing and the aptitude testing, and that you are, ready to start your training. I want you to consider this. Flying, especially short haul, means long days, multiple sectors, effectively locked in the broom cupboard at the front end of, be it an Embraer, a 320 family, or a 737, with a stranger. The bigger the company, the stranger the person can be, and for example at British Airways, you could quite regularly, sounds strange, you could quite regularly fly with someone and then not see them for 2 years. So consider how you as a person would deal with that social interaction. And I spoke to a recruiter before, and one of the recruitment pilots said, when they go into the interview, they're not interested in whether you can fly the aircraft, because they know if you've got to the interview, you've got your licenses, you've got some experience, or you've come through the cadet scheme. What they are interested in is if they can sit next to you for 8 hours a day. Are you someone that's going to integrate on the flight deck? Are you someone that people can work with without causing animosity? And it's not a perfect system, as anyone from British Airways or any major airline watching this will know. There are still people that get through the cracks, but they're really looking to see how you will deal with and how people will deal with you and your personality. Another positive of the job is that it gives you a lot of time to work on other projects. If you have lots of commitments, if you have a family, or if you simply have a fun social life, you might find that your time off evaporates and you just don't have time to work on yourself or other projects. The nice thing with aviation is that it does give you those opportunities down route. This has become harder on short haul and with short haul airlines, because you are so productive now compared to how it used to be, that you really do get to your destination and have somewhere between 12 and 14 hours off. Most of the time you don't have more than 14 hours down route, which by the time you've eaten, slept and eaten again doesn't give you a whole lot of time. But the amount of days off that you get each month compared to an office job really do allow you to work on yourself and study new things, pick up a degree or another degree, or just expand your skill sets and opportunities should the worst happen and you lose your medical, which is really useful. Useful because you have to remember that if you lose your medical, you could be out on your ear, and suddenly this career that you thought was going to last to retirement is cut short by something as simple as being on the crew bus that's involved in an accident. Okay, so here's the last thing I'd have you consider before you dive into an aviation career. Do you think that career will be there when you want to retire? If you're in your mid-40s, you're probably fine, but I've had emails from people who are 13, 15, 18, asking if they should become pilots, and I have to just wonder, with the rate of technological progression, will this career still exist when they want to retire in 50 years? Right now, the iPhone is only 10 years old, or just over a decade old, and a lot has changed since that was first released. So you have to wonder, how long will two-pilot flight decks exist? How long after that would a single-pilot flight deck exist? And at what point do UAVs really just take over? We're probably safe with the next couple of generations of aircraft, but Embraer have famously said that they are working towards a single-pilot cockpit in the not-too-distant future. Will that mean that you have a second pilot on the ground who's monitoring an array of aircraft that can be consulted in case of decision-making requirements, or in case there's an emergency, take remote control? Who knows? My concern would be, if you go into this career from 18 today, will that career still exist for you, and will there be that number, the same number of jobs when you want to retire at 65 or 67 or 70, depending on how the retirement age drifts? And after 12 years of flying, I can safely say that as soon as we can be replaced by an autonomous unit, we will be. The penny pinchers are looking to pay the new guys as little as possible and get rid of the older guys just as quickly as they can. So as soon as UAVs can take over, they definitely will. Now that was a mishmash of content. So to summarize, if you want to be a pilot, do so. If you can afford it, do so. But go into it with your eyes open. Know that the buy-in is ridiculous. Know that you will miss more family and social events than you'll dare count. And also be aware that it only takes a terror attack or a downturn in the economy to make airlines unable to or unwilling to fly the aircraft, and thus no longer require the same number of pilots. Go into it with your eyes open, but also know that it's not all negatives. You can have great fun flying. It doesn't matter if you're cloud surfing through a TMA, or flying a non-precision approach in marginal conditions, or dealing with some technical fault that no one has ever even considered could occur. As long as you do that, as long as you approach it with an open mind and with your eyes open, knowing that this might not be a career that lasts forever, I implore you to at least consider doing it. And ultimately remember, it is a job. And jobs don't last forever. At a certain point it may become untenable, and at that point you can start looking for your career-ending opportunity. I hope you've enjoyed the video. If it's helpful, let me know in the comments. If it's not, you'll probably already be letting me know in the comments. If you're new here, consider subscribing, that would be great, and thank you to everyone that is already subscribed. It's cold. I might do the next video inside. I don't know why I insist on doing them outside. We'll see you again soon. Bye bye.